Schizophrenia was something that when I was first diagnosed, I was terrified. I refused to learn anything about it. I didn't really want to come to terms with this diagnosis, and it wasn't until I did that I could finally ask for help from the people around me. The Serenity tattoo was really meant to be for me to understand that this was going to be a part of my life, and I had to learn how to live with it and how to function with it and ask for help from the people around me. I actually first met my wife Allyson, and she was there when I had my first episode of psychosis. She gave up a lot of her own journey to help me through what I was going through, and she stayed with me as a caregiver until today. She was there for me throughout the journey, but it was really more just subtle, letting me know that she was concerned and she was worried.
You kind of fell into the role of a caregiver, like right away.
I think just you were fully capable of doing the things. You just might need a little prompt to, maybe get in the shower, get things ready, but also explaining it didn't have to be urgent. You don't have to do it in the next 10 minutes.
Well, I felt like a lot of the times you never told me to do it. You more explained the why, like why I should do the things, why getting out and being around people might make me feel better. And that made me feel like I could decide whether or not to do those things.
Being a caregiver for someone with an illness that prevents insight can be very difficult because all you want to do is explain to them that you understand they need help. A lot of the times they can't fully understand what's going on with them, and so as much as a caregiver wants to be there, they really have to kind of sit on the sidelines and wait for them to accept help, and that can be not only scary but frustrating. So my advice is always be ready for when they do ask for help. Don't make yourself the enemy in their delusions or their paranoia, because if they don't feel like they can trust you, they're gonna stop reaching out.
During this time, you were like super accommodating. Like, how did you recognize these things, and how did you just know that I was struggling when I couldn't even tell?
Yeah, so I could just tell kind of your change of demeanor. Maybe you weren't as excited to be there. I could tell you weren't feeling very well.
The most common symptoms that I deal with are auditory and visual hallucinations. When I was first experiencing symptoms, I also dealt a lot with delusions and paranoia. Allyson knows that when I'm struggling with auditory or visual hallucinations, I prefer that she distracts me from them instead of acknowledging them or trying to convince me that they're not real. For me, that only makes it more difficult to differentiate between what's there and what's not.
There's a couple different coping mechanisms I found for when I'm having symptoms at home or just to kind of maintain self-care. One of the things I do is if I'm home by myself, I pretty much always have noise on. So I either have my TV, music, something in case I start having symptoms that can work almost as a distraction. When I'm having auditory or visual hallucinations, I have different coping mechanisms. So for example, when I'm having visual hallucinations, I'll actually pull out my phone and I'll open up my camera. And if the person that I'm seeing also appears in my camera, I know they're really there. Whereas if I look through and I don't see the person there, I can tell that it's a hallucination. I also have a psychiatric service dog who's trained to greet people on command so that I can identify if I'm really by myself or not. And these have all come over time as ways for me to feel more comfortable in my space. When I started my treatment, I started with daily oral medication, and I found that a long-acting injection or an LAI actually works better for me because I do travel a lot. I do like having the freedom of not having to constantly think about taking medication. I know when I started LAIs, the big thing for me was I felt a little bit more stability, but I also didn't feel like I had to constantly think about my diagnosis. It allowed me to separate myself from my diagnosis a little bit. When I was taking oral medication, it was like every day, multiple times a day, I had to constantly think about schizophrenia and my journey.
That is something I noticed. I think it gave you a lot more clear days when you didn't really feel like you were having symptoms. You wouldn't have to still have that reminder of taking the medication, so you might even have a week where you're feeling good and symptom-free.
Caregiving can be really difficult. It is an individualized experience, just like the patient experience. But if I had to give 3 tips for caregivers, The first one would be educate yourself about the illness. Educating yourself about what they're going through and the symptoms they're going to face can help you better understand them. If they're able to articulate some of their thoughts and feelings, then communication is always my second tip. And the last tip I would give people is just learn to empathize, because although you may never fully understand what your family member, friend, or loved one is going through with a diagnosis like schizophrenia, at least being able to empathize with them shows them that you care.
I realized very early on that self-care played a huge role in me being able to pursue everything I wanted to do. And self-care can look different depending on who you are, but overall, it can be very helpful to focus on treatment, staying active, and getting rest. The Serenity tattoo is really meant to symbolize acceptance, because a schizophrenia diagnosis can be so debilitating and so scary for not only the patient but the care team. Everyone's journey is going to be a very individualized experience, but it makes it so much easier to have people around you that are willing to learn, willing to understand, and willing to bring hope to this dark journey.